Good evening. Welcome to tonight's On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers. Tonight's show is live, so if you have any questions for our guests during the show, text them to 87778 with the word EDGE, a space, and then your name, location and your message. And we'll try to pick up on any that really hit the mark. They're all charged at standard rate, so why not get texting? In tonight's show, I'll be talking with a fascinating guest who will tell us about the extensive research on the subject of the growth and influence of a semi-secretive organisation called Common Purpose. Apparently it has links at the highest levels in every town and city in the UK, and its true but secret agenda may be linked to a future martial law government. Live in the studio we've got campaigner and former Lieutenant Commander RN Brian Gerrish, who will offer us some very startling revelations. What a show we've got tonight! Brian, welcome.
Good evening.
So, Brian, I know you've been campaigning for quite a while on the subject of common purpose and associated subjects, but I think we need to get a little bit of background. Obviously, you were in the Royal Navy for some time. Could you give us a little bit of...
Yeah, 21 years altogether, and I left in 1993, set up a small business, changed that, got involved in another business, and eventually started to get what I call a bit comfortable.
Okay, so far so good.
Yeah. So the business was energy management. We looked after the energy accounts, electricity, gas, water for some large commercial organisations. And that was at a time when I suppose everything to do with the environment was a very big thing. And I believed in global warming, which I don't now.
Okay. Okay, well, so what went wrong?
Well, eventually, after we'd... got comfortable, we started to look at other things. I was working with another ex-Navy guy at the time, and we had the opportunity to try and help the local community around the naval base in Plymouth, where there was a lot of long-term unemployed, especially amongst the younger people. Okay. And we came up with the idea of trying to help them with skills training, well, we were aiming towards apprenticeships, and the idea was to get them doing basic skills on repair and build of small wooden boats.
Okay.
We had a lot of enthusiasm from the community, and in fact there were some amazing things started to happen because people in the local community started to talk about HMS Beagle, which took Darwin to sea and was refitted in Devonport before it went, and we discovered that a lot of the local people could actually trace their genealogy to that ship. So we started out with a small idea, but a lot of people said, hey, if it got really big, we could have a go at building a Beagle. And a lot of support from local people. The establishment got on board and was enthusiastic.
By the establishment, you mean what, the local council?
Yeah, Plymouth City Council, South West of England Regional Development Agency, the Government Office of the South West, the Chamber of Commerce. So people were getting very excited because it was what we were told everybody wanted, which is, you know, skills, training and jobs.
Okay.
It was going along exceptionally well. Then we were invited to apply for some grant funding, and it was quite bizarre. Within a couple of weeks, it was like the shutters had come down, so we didn't get the funding, but people we'd been speaking with didn't talk to us. They didn't reply to emails or telephone calls, just like a door closed.
Okay, well, why do you think that happened then?
At the time, we'd no idea, but with my colleague Sandy, we decided we would carry on with the project without help from the public sector. So we started to get the project going quite successfully, and then basically we started to be threatened. So there's a story here. If I tell you a little bit about it, it'll lead in. Stop me. Well, essentially, we got visits from people who suggested that maybe we should let the project go, and if you said why, they said because we're ruffling feathers. But we never got any clear answers. There was some talk that developers wanted the land we were wanted for massive housing development, but we didn't quite understand it. The threats escalated, poisonous emails. Eventually they got to death threats and bricks through windows, arson attempts. And one evening I got a call, and a man said, I've got a friend who'd like to talk to you. I
don't think I'd have attended that meeting personally, but...
Well, it was interesting times, but I went to see him, and he asked about the project, said we were having problems, and I said yes. And he said, what do you think the problem is? And I said, I don't know. And he then said to me, I think the problem's common purpose. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's an organisation. And I said, would you tell me about it? And he said, I'd rather not. So I said, well, I've driven here to talk to you. Why won't you talk to me about it? And he said, well, I'd just rather not. I got the impression he was scared. So we chatted about some other subjects. I went home, went on the internet, looked up a site for an organisation called Common Purpose, very different from the present website. And I thought, what is this? Because it was talking about future leaders in society, and I'd never heard of it. So from that point on, we started to dig, and what we discovered in Plymouth was that it was everywhere. Police, hospitals, schools, Chamber of Commerce, but we'd never heard of it. So I'm with colleagues in the Chamber of Commerce who are Common Purpose, but I'd never heard of it.
And they didn't say? There was no
way of knowing? They didn't say, no.
And how had they become part of Common Purpose, members, if you like?
Well, the correct term, according to Common Purpose, is that they're graduates, but basically they had been selected to do a course, which at that stage was a course called Matrix, which was 48 hours in a secluded environment, a hotel or a small accommodation where people could stay overnight, and then following that a day a month for a year. And
it was called Matrix. That's rather...
well, it's an interesting title, isn't it?
Yes,
but what we were really interested in was the fact that it was talking about creating the new leaders. So you say, one, who is Common Purpose to create these people, and what do these new leaders do? And all we knew was we were living in a bit of a nightmare, because there's threats coming in. You're discovering people are members of an organisation they're not declaring, including the police. And you start to get a picture of something working under the surface of society. I'll take it a step further, because eventually a particular gentleman had a good look at the website, and what he found were documents talking about re-engineering a new society, where common purpose leaders would be the people who controlled society. And the bit that we also paid attention to is that they were talking about taking children of the age of 12 to 14 and effectively grooming them to be the new leaders. Now, when I've talked to audiences live now, quite often older people will say, this is what happened in Nazi Germany, Hitler Youth.
Yes, like the Pope. He was a member of Hitler Youth.
Well, he was. I don't know whether he's Common Purpose, but certainly he was a member of Hitler Youth, yeah.
So, presumably, after you realised that possibly you could blame Common Purpose for what had happened to you, and you'd looked into Common Purpose, where did you take it from there? Why didn't you just carry on with your life and...
Well, it's a pretty interesting circumstance when you've had a perfectly good idea to help people and somebody's suppressing it, and also threats and intimidation are used. But I was very lucky because I was with a good group of people who stuck together, and we started to dig. And when we started to dig, we found very interesting things.
Such as?
Well, the key bit is you find a city, which Plymouth was the first one, where you found that people were common purpose in positions of power and influence. And what we started to realise very quickly was that if you had enough people in key positions working for this organisation, then effectively common purpose could control the agenda in a city. And some of the supporting documentation that a colleague of mine, well qualified, read, said absolutely that, how to control your host city. So we began to get a picture that there was I'll call it a quasi-political organisation controlling a city by pulling the levers of key people in positions of power and influence.
So somehow they had got the buy-in of these people who were already in positions of power, is that what you're saying?
Well, those people had been given common purpose courses.
Given them, or because I believe they're sold them, aren't they?
Well, this is a very important point, because common purpose talks as though you walk into a common purpose office and say, I'd like to do the course, and you do it. That is absolutely not true, because what happens is that groups of what they call senior common purpose people in each city select who will do the course or not. And in my talks and on the website we show documentation where people are selected, he is in the right position, this is the right head teacher, and other people are rejected. One man in Ipswich is rejected because he's too Ipswich. Okay?
Well, I can understand that.
You laugh, but this is all going on out of the public eye. So what we've got is a group of individuals who could include a policeman, a council officer, a local developer, a vicar, maybe somebody from the local university. They are an advisory board for common purpose, and they are selecting in their community who is okay, who is the right material to be common purpose trained.
I understand also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I have read that even criminals are inducted into common purpose.
Absolutely. And one
known criminals.
Known criminals.
Is that because they have some influence in the community?
Well, they certainly have major influence in it, but it depends what you think that common purpose is trying to do in society. Common purpose says that it is trying to assist society and create future leaders and educate people. But what we are finding is that where common purpose is operating, never mind what common purpose says, we're finding people who say since common purpose has been operating, things seem to be breaking down.
So do you think that's why they were trying to stop you having this effort to help young people by building
Absolutely,
this ship?
Because what is actually happening in this country is it's being taken apart. I use an expression which is, why does nothing work anymore? If you look out the window and you look at what's happening in society, nothing works. Schools, hospitals, transport, police. You must have seen it. Haven't you seen it?
Well, my opinion doesn't matter, Brian. I'm interested.
Well, I'd like to try it, see what you say.
I don't know what to compare it with.
Really?
No.
Well, I just looked back for 20 years as to what was going on in the country when probity and honesty in the public sector was generally regarded as a baseline. And now we've got the most amazing things happen, whether it's cover-ups over Dr. Kelly, or we've now got lords who are taking money and then just saying very calmly, oh, I'm terribly sorry. Something's wrong, isn't it? And I will say to you, when you look at an area of society, if we say something's wrong, is common purpose operating there? It certainly is.
So you see this common purpose spreading throughout the UK, presumably. I mean, is it everywhere now?
I don't see it, because we have proven and we can show that it's in any city.
Every city?
Every city, yeah.
And every town?
If you go to my website, which is CP Exposed, there's actually a map on there which shows the geographical distribution of common purpose.
Is that cpexposed.org, is that right? I think I've got... Oh, no, I've got
.com.
cpexposed.com. And you also produce this magazine, don't you, which is called...
It's a newspaper.
Newspaper, I beg your pardon, this newspaper called UK Column, which people can receive.
Absolutely. We've got a little office based in Plymouth, but that paper has now been operating for about 2 years. Group of volunteers, not just me, a lot of other people. But if you go to the website, which is ukcolumn.org, you can catch up on the real truth.
Okay, so what have we? We have a semi-secret organisation that operates across the entire country, that has as members people who have paid to go on some sort of programming course. Would you call it that, or am I putting
Well, let's deal with the paid, because this is another little thing which Common Purpose plays around with. If you look at what was happening when we discovered Common Purpose, a matrix course cost £3,950 plus VAT. So that's quite a lot of money. I don't know how poor people are supposed to do the course. Now, what would happen is that most of the people who paid the full amount came from the public sector. So if it was a local council, they ramp up fees to Common Purpose of 100 grand. But somebody else, to make it appear that it's non-elitist, would be given a bursary and they might pay £800.
And then who would make the difference up? Would that be the local council then?
Usually, because Common Purpose, the overwhelming payment for Common Purpose courses comes out of the public sector. And again, on the website, we've put up the actual documents where we're showing, if we take Devon and Cornwall Police, they've racked up over £57,000 in Common Purpose training. But if you ask them what they get out of it, they can't tell you.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. We're going to go for a break now, Brian. So if you've got any texts you'd like to send in, send them to 87778. Put your name and where you're from. Use the word EDGE, a space, and then your text. And we'll see you back here very soon. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest tonight, Brian Gerrish, who's talking about common purpose. I've got a couple of texts in. I'm just going to quickly read a couple of texts out, and then we'll get back onto the subject that we were talking about. A lady here, Linda in Birmingham, says, I've worked in the NHS for 33 years. I always knew there's been something underlying, evolving, and have said it a long time. So Linda thinks you might be right there. And here's one from Julian Martin in Telford, and they say, is it right Gordon Brown and Tony Blair have links to Common Purpose and the Fabian Society? And somebody else, Jim from Larne, that's in Ireland, I believe, Northern Ireland, is Common Purpose part of a bigger organisation?
Right, well, if I do with Blair and Gordon Brown, the answer is definitely yes, because the old Office of the Deputy Prime Minister was pushing Common Purpose very strongly. We've got documentation showing that they'd spent, I think it's £80,000 on my website, the real documentation, so it's all evidence. So we know that Common Purpose is closely connected to the highest levels of the Labour government, and we've got other documentation showing meetings at 10 Downing Street. If you go to the website, cpexposed.com, you can call up the documentation yourself. And
is it part of a bigger organisation, as Jim asked?
I believe it is. I've used the word believe because I can't give you one piece of documentation, but what we see are very close links between Common Purpose and Demos, which is, in my view...
a think tank, isn't it?
Well, it's a Marxist think tank, in my view.
Yeah.
But we know that Demos is working very closely with Common Purpose. And the bizarre thing at the moment, or the interesting thing, is Demos, which was initially a big policy organisation for Tony Blair, is now helping both the Conservatives and the Lib Dems form policy. That's provable.
I think that's a good point to make, though, about provable, because, you know, obviously Common Purpose is a charity. We wouldn't want to libel anybody on this channel. Yeah. So can you assure us that everything you say that you're sure about, you have proof for?
Well, we have a simple rule, and that is if we're talking about something factually, it's because we've got the documentation, or the phone calls, or the tapes to back it up.
Okay.
And a lot of the information has now been out in the public domain in written form for well over a year. So I am not producing anything new at the moment. I'm based on facts. And again, I say if you go to the website, you can call up the real documents yourself. If I'm not sure of something, I'll say I believe it is the case.
OK, now the person who started Common Purpose, I understand, is a woman called Julia Middleton. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, that's the correct lady, and she says she started it.
So if she's watching and she'd like to text in, I'd be very happy to read out your text, assuming that I can believe it's you texting. So there you go.
Well, that'd be very interesting. I hope she does.
Well, I hope she does too.
Yeah.
So, Common Purpose, they seem to be everywhere. Public money appears to be used to pay for people to go on their courses.
Overwhelmingly public money, not always, because some private companies will pay for the full price for courses, but overwhelmingly Common Purpose exists on public money.
And I understand some people get the course for free.
Some would get it for free, or peanuts, yeah.
OK. So what's their aim? What are they trying to do?
Well, if you go by their own material, they are trying to create future leaders. It's just when you ask what sort of leader they're talking about, it all becomes a bit nebulous and woolly. But it's quite clear from their documentation that it is elitist. If you look at the people who are pulled in at high level, you're taking people at the highest level amongst European bankers and senior European policy makers. So you're not dealing with people down at a carpenter level. What I believe they are doing, and I believe the evidence is there to show it, is they call themselves a charity, but their whole preoccupation is political. So if you look at the meetings that are set up, who they're mixing with, Demos, Downing Street, the European Union, the whole thing is political. And of course, in theory, a charity can't be political.
And you know, you mentioned that they stopped your activity, which was helping young people.
I believe they stopped my activity.
Excuse me, you believe they stopped your activity. Does that mean that do you think that their agenda is to disrupt society so that they can, in some way, assume power?
I'd put it another way. What they're actually doing is reframing people to follow their set of values. So people are doing the common purpose course and they're getting a set of values given to them. I can talk about that a little bit more. And that set of values means that you are going to work with other common purpose people outside your authority. Now, this is a key expression which Julia Middleton loves, and she's written a book on it. Now, in theory, it sounds good, doesn't it? You mix people across their boundaries. But you have to say, where does this lead? Because if you take a police officer, and if we take somebody like Maria Wallace, who was the head of Devon and Cornwall Police, all of a sudden she's getting very excited that she knows how the levers of political power in Europe work. Is that why we paid her? Didn't we pay her to solve crime on the streets of Devon? So Julia Middleton is waxing lyrical about breaking down boundaries and getting people outside their silos. But one of the problems that's going on in society at the moment is we're not getting the concentration of people within their field. A hospital's job is to make people better, presumably. Do you really need the chief executive understanding how the levers of power work in his local area? That's not his job. So you've got to be very careful with reading what common purpose says. It sounds good on the tin, but when you actually analyse it, something is not right. And the other thing that goes with it is they're operating under the Chatham House rule.
Right, yes, Chatham House rule. I do understand what that is, but if you could explain.
Well, the Chatham House rule is a rule which came out of Chatham House, which is the Tavistock Institute, I think, in London. And basically it says you can have a meeting, but when you leave the meeting, you don't say who was present or who gave a particular piece of information.
But you can use the information?
You can use the information.
Okay.
So
it's semi-secret, then, this organisation?
Well, absolutely.
Even though it's a charity, it's supposed to be for the common good.
But you imagine you've got a closed-door room where you have a police officer, a local developer, and somebody from the local authority who has control over public money and grants. The public has a right, I believe, to know what went on in those meetings. But if I try, or if other members of the public try to get that information out into the open, common purpose shuts all the doors. And I can tell you that they shut the doors at the moment by coercing people in the public sector to breach the Data Protection Act.
Are you seriously saying that they're forcing people to breach the Data Protection Act?
Coercing was the word I used.
Coercing.
And we can prove that because we know at the moment that a couple of local authorities, at least one police authority, and another major London organisation are getting quite upset with common purpose because the names of people who've put in freedom of information requests are being compiled by common purpose on a list. Now,
how do they get those names? How would they get those names?
Because a common purpose person will phone up their common purpose colleague in a council and say, who made that request? And this is the insidious nature of common purpose in the first place, that instead of people working through the rules and structure of their own organisation, they are putting the requests and demands of common purpose above their own organisation.
So it's like a kind of shadow government, isn't it?
It's a shadow government. And what gets quite spooky, to use that word, is where you see common purpose saying, our networks, this is a quote, our networks will soon be very important. What do they mean? But then you see them now starting to join UK networks with networks in Europe. So we think we've got our normal system of government operating, but what's actually happening under the surface is a new common purpose is shaping the direction of society. And you will have heard Gordon Brown talk about common purpose. And there's
yes, and I heard Barack Obama using the expression common purpose.
Absolutely, because there's a real movement when you say, well, what is that common purpose? And that common purpose is a new form of government, and it certainly is not democratic.
Okay, if you've got a text, please text us in on 87778, put the word EDGE, a space, and then your text. It'd be nice to know who you are and where you're texting from. I'm going to just read a couple here. I've got one from Jay in Northern Ireland. It says, sounds like another group of New World Order minions. Are there any Freemasonic links?
This is a very good question. We have stuck just with common purpose, but I have to say that researchers who are working with us are adamant that they are finding links through to Freemasonry. Now, I'm not going to get into what could be quite a heavy discussion on that. I will just say that, yes, we're finding links. You draw your own conclusions.
OK, I've got two more here that are quite similar, so I'll read them both together. Does common purpose have an end goal? That's Tim in Wolverhampton. And Pat in Devon says, what can be done about common purpose?
They've certainly got an end goal, and I'll tell you what I believe from thousands of hours of research and looking at the documents. Okay. They are looking for a new society with a new form of government, the post-democratic era. Now, that's a very interesting expression. And in that post-democratic era, the government and the control will be formed by common purpose chosen leaders. So you are not going to be voting for your local councillor. The person who's going to be running you is going to be an elitist common purpose leader.
Well, that's us sorted then, right? Isn't it?
What do we do about it? This is the very good bit, because the easy thing is that we expose what's happening. And this is where it's quite interesting. We have a charity which says that it's a wonderful charity, but when we ask a council or the police or a hospital, how much money have you spent on it, they don't want to tell us. Now, that doesn't make sense, because surely if Common Purpose was providing such brilliant training, you'd boast about it. I am pleased to tell you that Devon and Cornwall Police have spent £57,000. But when we went and tried to get that information, they actually said they got no figures on how much they'd spent. That's remarkable, isn't it? This is provable.
It's truly remarkable, yes,
yeah?
yes.
When we said, well, we know you've trained people, so do you want to rephrase that and have a look? They suddenly say, oh, we've spent £57,000. Now, the person who was doing the freedom of information research inside the police actually said to me, I don't know what's going on, but they won't give me the information, and they keep quoting the Chatham House rule. Now, I knew what was happening, because basically the common purpose trained graduates were actually refusing to give information about common purpose. And that is because it is a secretive organisation.
Well, I've just got a text here from one of my former guests here on The Edge, John Harris, the free man. And he says, I know you know him, Brian. He says, Hi, Brian. Demos is a corporation just founded on Dun & Bradstreet. Cheers, John Harris.
Well, thank you very much, John.
And Paul in Stoke has asked, this is really good text tonight, are they using NLP training?
I think this is almost certain. We know that they're using behavioural techniques, because they admit that. There's a website that was recently set up, which I think is called www.commonpurpose.net, and on that website they are refuting claims from extreme... Oh, I am an extremist, by the way. Anybody who...
Not according to you, though.
Pardon?
Not according to you.
No, Common Purpose calls me effectively an extremist. I am BMP, I'm part of an extremist movement. This is in documents.
Yes, and yet you were considered safe hands to run a, what was it, a frigate for 20 years? Or...
Well, it was a fishery protection vessel when I was a captain, but I was allowed to run around with missiles and torpedoes and things, but Common Purpose says I'm extreme.
Okay.
And anybody who dares to ask questions about what they're doing is extreme. Why is that? Why do you think they do that?
Well, it's a classic case of disinformation, isn't it?
Well, I believe they're covering up something. I'll just come back to one point, because somebody said, what do we do about it? And this is a key thing. Exposure. It's very easy. Write letters, freedom of information requests to your local council, police force, hospital, and ask how much they've spent on Common Purpose, and ask for a copy of the invoices, which you are lawfully and legally entitled to do.
Okay. Do they have to tell you who's taken the course?
Well, in fact, they won't. you will find that when you get documents back, all the names are blanked out, as the details of the meetings. Again, if you go on my website, CP Exposed, you can see the real documents, and you can see large areas of text redacted, blacked out.
Okay. I've got a question here from Ryan in Luton. Have you spoken to any whistleblowers, as I'm sure people join with good intentions, then realise something is amiss and wish to speak out?
Well, the answer is yes, and I think this is a very good point. We've had a lot of people contact us as a result of the website, and indeed articles that we've put in the UK column. I'll hold that up, the UK column.
Yeah, lots of copies of that everywhere.
Okay, and they tell stories. They'll tell stories about strange things happening in their organisation. Some people say they've done the course, and some are quite rude. They think it's rubbish. But other people have told us about seeing changes in people close to them. So one man talked about seeing his wife change, her personality changed after she'd done common purpose training. And this is not surprising because, according to Common Purpose themselves, they're using Kolb and techniques which link into Jung. You're talking about changing people's views.
Brian, we're going for another break now. Once again, if you'd like to text in your questions or comments, do so now. See you very soon. Thank you. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Brian Gerrish, who's talking about Common Purpose. I'd just like to say, if Common Purpose would like a right of reply at some future time, I'm very happy to offer it to them. Brian, I'm going to read you a couple of quick texts here. Frank Thomas in Newport Gwent, are we talking about a poor man's Illuminati? If so, where are the aliens? Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Whatever that means. I'm not sure what that question means.
OK. Mick Milton Keynes, what is Brian's view on lawful rebellion?
Well, where we're heading to at the moment, and I'll make a statement, I believe this, as an ex-military person, we are heading towards a vicious police state. And at the moment, we know that our politicians are not working for us. We certainly know the House of Lords is not working for us because they are working for profit. And we need to do something to stop the slide into a police state. And lawful rebellion is taking action within the law in order to stop that situation. But it's time people got off their bottoms to do something to shout and stop what is happening. It's very serious what's started to happen in this country.
OK, well, that's pretty powerful stuff. I'm going to read you one more text, and then we're going to go back to discussing the main issue here.
Yeah.
Sorry to text again. I take it this is from the lady who was a nurse working in a hospital. She says, people in the NHS are terrified to speak out, even though money isn't getting to patient care. What can one person do to get others to speak?
Well, this is a very typical comment. We get a lot of calls and emails ourselves saying this. Our organisation isn't working, whether it's a university or a hospital or a school. And if you speak out about what's actually happening, fraud, corruption, bullying, you get victimised. And what you need to do is join in with other people. So have a look at the British Constitution group. That's the bcgroup.org.uk website, which is actually talking about lawful rebellion. We had a superb conference in Stoke this Saturday just gone. There was 500 people there, and we were talking about the state of the nation. So we talked about what was happening with the Constitution, the police state, we talked about common purpose, and we actually talked about child snatching. And I can tell you the response from that audience was fantastic. So don't try and fight it on your own because you get picked off. Join in with other people. And what we have said is that the aim is definitely no violence. Very, very important, this. And what you do has to be inside the law. The government at the moment, in my professional opinion, if I'm allowed to say it like that, the next step is to increase the financial collapse, and then they are going to foment violence on the streets. And that violence on the streets will be used to trigger the enactment of all of the anti-terrorism legislation, and you are going to be in a police state. So the last thing we need is violence, and I say this to every audience, whether it's to political groups or whether I'm talking to Muslim groups. we are all in this together, and it's very, very important. But for that lady, get involved with other people, learn what other people know, and that is the movement. We need to get millions of people in this country mobilised.
Do you want to give that website again?
Yeah, it's www.thebcgroup, BC is for British Constitution, thebcgroup.org.uk.
.org.uk. Yeah. OK, I want to ask you about the Media Standards Trust.
Well, I'm delighted that you've brought that in, because I wonder how many of the viewers will know that the Media Standards Trust exists. This is a trust which is set up to ensure the even-handedness of broadcasting. And I mean, we've got a situation today in this country where the mainstream media is just not getting the truth across. We're not told the truth about the EU, we're not told the truth about the rioting that's been happening in European countries, we're not told about the troubles in Iceland. Nobody explains where Gordon Brown has got 900 billion from. So we know that at the moment the mainstream media is not telling the truth. But Julia Middleton, Chief Executive from Common Purpose, has been instrumental in setting up a Media Standards Trust, which is apparently going to help the performance of the media. The only thing is that the office, unless it's moved recently, was actually set up inside the Common Purpose offices. And when you look at the people she's got on her team, they are elitist, including members of the major international banks. So why international banks would like to get involved with the media, I don't know. But I don't think it bodes well.
Well, I think I could probably guess.
So can I.
Talking about mainstream media, obviously we're not quite like those mainstream media. You wouldn't see this show, would you, on the BBC?
No, but it's interesting that if you look at the figures of graduates, you'll find that the BBC is riddled with common purpose graduates. In fact, I had a call from a BBC person following one of the, I think she saw the Leicester talk that I did, and she said to me, how many people do I think were common purpose graduates in the BBC? And I said to her, well, probably about 500, 500. And she said, I think there's 1,000. Now, if there's 1,000 and they've paid £3,500 plus VAT...
Of our money.
That's a lot of viewers' licence fees for a charity. Well, Julia Middleton takes £80,000 or £90,000 out of that. She's, I believe, earning that sort of money. But something's wrong. We don't know about this charity. It doesn't want to tell us what it's doing. Authorities don't want to tell us how much they're spending on it. And now they've got their little tentacles into the media. I think this is very sinister.
So they can put out statements as the Media Standards Trust and affect what the media is saying.
Well, go on the internet yourself and look at the Media Standards Trust and look at who's involved with it. And they are all elitist people. It's incredible. They are not there, in my opinion, to actually ensure the openness of media. They're there to make sure that what appears in the media fits their view of society. OK, well, Jim from Larne, who texted us earlier, I believe, Excuse me.
says, have you ever asked your MP to raise the common purpose issue in Parliament?
Well, we've certainly tried the local MPs in the Plymouth area.
Which is where you're based.
Yeah. Mr. Gary Streeter got very hot under the collar and didn't want to say whether he was involved in Common Purpose or not, although he did eventually send me a letter indicating that he wasn't. But we've got two Labour MPs, Linda Gilroy and Alison Seebeck. I'm going to have to say I believe, because I can't remember which one it is, but certainly one of those two I believe is involved with Common Purpose. Okay. So it's no good going to your MP.
Well, no, well, I suppose not.
But Philip Davis, MP, has been asking questions in Parliament about Common Purpose, and when he discovered the Ministry of Defence had spent over £400,000, he started to get very interested.
Well, for their members, for people who work for the Ministry of Defence, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so we do have MPs who've now started to ask the right question, which is, what is this charity doing? Now, we got a clue a little while ago. One of the people involved with Demos is a chap called Jeff Mulgan, and he wrote a very interesting book, which is The Invisible Hand, Remaking Charities in the 21st Century. And what it's suggesting is that charities are to be used for political purposes. And Miliband tried to get a a bill through Parliament, or in the initial stages, which was for the first time going to make it lawful for charities to be politically involved. Now this is very sinister because there's 170,000 charities registered in UK with a budget of, I believe, £44 billion. What happens when those charities start to support a political line? You've got a problem.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case, doesn't it? Mickey Milton Keynes says, does Brian feel kids are being dumbed down either with drugs or alcohol?
Well, I certainly do, because I believe the whole of our society is under an attack. And I state this very freely. If you go and get a copy of this newspaper, on one particular page we've actually got a plan of the attack, and you'll see how each area of society, I'll get there in a minute, if I can show that, that's page 9 of our latest newspaper, if you can see that okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And what it's doing, it's listing the areas of society, it's saying what will be done, and then it's giving a result. And I'll tell you that if you look at families, it's saying that families are to be broken up. And why you do that is if you break the family bond, you then leave the state to claim the children. This is the way it works in communist countries. I find it very significant that Common Purpose is working very hard at the moment to get in amongst the Muslim communities where the family units are still very strong. And I can prove that because we've got the documentation showing what Common Purpose is trying to do.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, and I'm not going to let this go in our last 5 minutes, that children are being taken from their parents.
Yep.
As part of this, is this something to do with Common Purpose, actually?
Well, I think we need to be very clear here. We know that children are being taken from their parents, and if you look at the front page of the Daily Mail today, it's got a classic example where a lot of people would say those children being taken and given to the wrong parents. What I had no idea would happen is that the moment we started to print this paper, people would call us with unbelievable stories of their children being taken, and initially you don't believe it, and then you see the evidence. And what people are talking about are social services working hand in hand with lawyers and barristers and the courts, fabricating evidence, committing perjury in court, falsifying court records, intimidation by the police in order to take people's children away from them.
But why would they want to do this? And is, you know, I'm very...
3 reasons. We believe 3 main reasons.
Okay.
One is to break up families. If you look at the way our society is going, families are under continual attack. And you break up families because that alienates mum and dad and it leaves the children vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
We are very sure, and I think it's not going to be too long before I don't have to do the research, other people are digging, we believe children are being used for drug testing. And children are dying in hospitals. There is never any proper pathology done on what caused the death, no proper analysis. And we are confident that what's actually going on is drug testing on children. And the other requirement...
Well, these are very serious allegations.
Very serious allegations. And the other thing which we are very certain is children are being deliberately taken from their parents and they are then being put into a system of abuse, which is either physical or sexual.
Well, again, extremely serious allegations, Brian.
Well, I don't sit here making these idly, and I've got no worries about this, because initially when people spoke to us, some you would say, where's the evidence? They're traumatised, they don't have it. But when people arrive with 3 ring files where they're showing falsified papers, they're showing discharge notes from hospitals with no signatures and no diagnosis, and I can show you 4 hospitals involved in that, we know what these people are saying is real. And at a talk in South Wales, 3 ladies stood up on camera with me, and one of them, as an example, said that when she tried to help the mother to stop the daughter being taken, she was threatened by the police.
Well, okay, but that's an individual case, and you weren't there, were you? So
no, but what I'm saying is that people are prepared to stand up and tell their story. And why you are not hearing about it, or we're not hearing about it, is because the family courts are closed. Now, we've had a change to that in that it's recently been stated the results of the court hearings will be made known, but that is a smokescreen because the damage is being done inside the courts.
And they're meeting in secret, aren't they?
They're meeting in secret. Just suppose that the judge running a secret family court was himself a child abuser. Just suppose that was true. You'd have a very dangerous situation. And I'm going to say the evidence coming in across the country is this is what is happening.
Well, I mean, that is probably the most shocking revelation that we've had on this show.
If you would like to run another programme and you would like people with the evidence and the experience, we will bring them to you.
Well, okay, well that's very interesting, and we'll certainly consider that. And as I say, if Common Purpose want to write a reply, we'll certainly give that to them.
Can I stress, because I think this is an important thing, I have not said that Common Purpose is directly involved in this activity, but what I will say to you is if we know that Common Purpose are having closed-door meetings for which there are no minutes, it would facilitate inappropriate behaviour by people in social services.
Okay, so it could be a separate thing and not connected to Common Purpose. That's what you're saying. Okay, I think that's important to make that point. Okay, well, it's been absolutely mind-blowing, this programme tonight, and thank you everyone for texting. And thanks to those who watched, and I'm speechless really. Thank you to my special guest Brian Gerrish. If you've enjoyed this show, please tell all your friends. Next week we'll be back with yet another exciting show that might well change the direction of your life. Until then, remember, they're watching you, watching us, watching them. Cheerio.